As you may know from watching this channel, I adore dividends and ETFs. So why not combine the two and discuss 5 dividend ETFs that you should consider included in your portfolio? Welcome back, and in this video, I'll go over 5 extremely good ETFs that you might want to consider adding to your portfolio. Please remember that this is only for enjoyment. Before I break into these ETFs, you must conduct your own research. Let's take a closer look at the first ETF on this list, VLG. Since VLG stands for the Vanguard Dividend Appreciation ETF, it is clear from the name that it seeks to increase dividends. Currently, this ETF has relatively low expense ratio of 0.06% VO, compared to 0.03% for the benchmark. But 0.06 is still a very low expense ratio. Companies must have large cap equity and have a track record of increasing their dividends year over year in order to qualify for inclusion in this ETF. However, in terms of returns, how has this ETF performed since inception, which was in 2006? This ETF has been around for quite some time, since 2006, and since that time, it has had an average annual return of just over 9% over the past 10 years, nearly 12% over the past 5 years, and nearly 12% over the past 3 years. Since its inception, or roughly 16 years ago, the Dividend Appreciation ETF has returned nearly 10%, which is excellent performance. Its annual average return has been just around 9%. VLG has 289 total holdings, with some of the more notable ones being United Health, Microsoft, J&J, Procter & Gamble, JP Morgan, Visa, and many other well-known household names. So with this ETF, you'll get around 300 total holdings. Lastly, for the dividend payout for VLG, the 30-day yield is 1.89, which is close to a 2% dividend yield with this ETF that has historically had grown as well. Moving on to the second ETF on this list, DGRO. This one can be for you if you're searching for dividend growth. The investment is the iShares Core Dividend Growth ETF, DGRO. Similar to VLG, this ETF's purpose is to seek out firms with a history of steady dividend growth and broad industry diversification. As such, like VLG, DGRO seeks out companies with this dividend growth history and owns stocks of those companies. You will pay 0.08% annually for DGRO, which is still incredibly inexpensive. The historical results for this fund don't go back as long as VLG because it was only established in 2014. But from its inception, it has had an average annual return of 10.88%, excluding the 2008-2009 financial crisis. With DGRO, there are 413 holdings in total, making it significantly larger than VLG. These 413 holdings include firms like Apple, Microsoft, J&J, JP Morgan, and P&G, making the dividend yield for DGRO slightly different from VLG. The 12-month trailing yield for DGRO is currently 2.14, making it slightly higher than the dividend yield for VLG, the other dividend growth ETF on this list. However, with DGRO, there is a 2.4 12-month trailing. The third and fourth ETFs on this list, which are more higher dividend yield ETFs rather than dividend growth ETFs explicitly. Let me know in the comments if you have any other questions about investing. Let's return to the video. The third ETF on this list is SCHD. This ETF holds businesses that are concentrated on the quality and sustainability of their dividend. Therefore, SCHD isn't necessarily a good investment. Only businesses with quality and sustainability of their dividends in terms of returns for SCHD since inception, which is 2011, are sought after by dividend growth-specific ETFs. It has generated exceptionally strong returns for this investment, with an average annual return of 13.63%. SCHD has an average annual return of about 14%, but as I said, it lacks VLG's history from before the 2008 crash, so it has just seen the bull market with still extremely strong returns. These are just a few of the companies that are held within SCHD, and in terms of the dividend yield, it currently has a trailing 12-month distribution yield of 3.35, making it the highest one that we've seen. This ETF has 104 total holdings, including companies like Texas Instruments, Merck International Business Machines, Verizon Broadcom, PepsiCo, and others. The fourth ETF on this list, VYM, is brought up as a result. The Vanguard High Dividend Yield ETF, or VYM, also has a very low expense ratio of just 0.06%. So these low expense ratios that we're witnessing here are fantastic. VYM has been around since 2006 and hasn't seen the greatest returns compared to VLG, DGRO, or SCHD, only about 8% average annual return. But keep in mind that this includes the 2008 market crash. However, in the 10-year it has been up 11% per year, and in the 5-year it has been up nearly 9%. So with this ETF, it has a high dividend yield, and as a result, growth will be marginally sacrificed, as can be seen from the historical returns of VYM. There are 443 total holdings in VYM, with some of the top holdings including Johnson & Johnson, Exxon, JP Morgan, Procter & Gamble, Chevron, Home Depot, Pfizer, and etc. Therefore, a stock like Exxon Mobil, which makes up nearly 3% of this fund, is not the biggest grower at all. And that's why we're seeing in terms of turns is not as good as VLG, DGRO, or SCHD. NOBL, the fifth and last ETF on this list, is now in view. It is the ETF that tracks the S&P 500 dividend aristocrats. You are all aware of my affection for the S&P 500, and this ETF holds high-quality companies whose dividends have grown for at least 25 consecutive years, with the majority of those companies doing so for at least 40 years. The expense ratio is now the highest on this list, at 0.035%. Consequently, the price is greater than normal to my taste. But if you're ready to pay it to obtain the S&P 500 dividend aristocrats, it's absolutely worthwhile. Absolutely worth the cost. Since this fund's inception in 2013, it has experienced yearly returns of 11.5%, over 11% in the past 5 years, and over 10.7% in the previous 3 years. Double-digit gains for a noble investment are something I like to see. This fund hasn't existed since the 2008 crash, but even then it had positive returns during this bull market. This ETF, which historically has only held 64 stocks, holds businesses including Stanley Black & Decker Church and Dwight V.F. Corporation. We haven't seen Sherwin-Williams West Pharmaceutical or 3M on the other 4 ETFs on this list. Keeping in mind that there are just 64 total holdings, there aren't many holdings compared to the other ETFs on our list that offer the same dividend yield. Of course, those 5 dividend ETFs are not the only ones. NOBL currently has SEC 30-day yield of just over 2%. However, if you're searching for dividend ETFs and you want long-term growth, then VLG and DGRO are excellent options to consider. If you also want greater yields and perhaps some growth mixed in, then VYM and SCHD are wonderful options to consider. You desire some dividend growth from S&P 500 firms? Then NOBL might be for you. However, keep in mind that this is merely for pleasure. Hope you have learned something from this video. What are your thoughts? Comment down below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to click the like button, and also don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell for you to be updated on our latest videos. See you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Want to learn more and be more financially literate? Click on the next videos we have in our channel, showing on the screen right now.